talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I would consider to be, in the last century, the greatest leader in the world. Not only in America, but the entire world, for the change that he brought. And for us to be in this historic place where he preached and shepherded a flock and was a pastor and a leader. And then we're especially honored to have his wife, Coretta Scott King and Bernice King, here with us. And I want to say one more thing before I launch into this lesson about Dr. King. This year I've had two highlights. In fact, recently somebody came to me and said, "John, what have been your highlights this year?" And it was so easy for me to tell them what it was, because I really have had two highlights. I had the privilege on the day that we honor Dr. King as a holiday to be here at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the family was so kind to ask me to come down with other speakers and take a few minutes to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader. It was a highlight. Place was packed out. The service was incredibly inspiring. And just to be able to stand with other people who have been great leaders, people who have stood with courageous stands for what is truly right, to be able to do that and to speak that day was an incredible honor. My first highlight was being able to honor him and spend a little bit of time with the family and the people on his holiday. Let's go to your notes. People are often led to causes and often become committed to great ideas through persons who personify those ideas. They have to find the embodiment of the idea in flesh and blood in order to commit themselves to it. And Martin Luther King Jr. was such a man. In James McGregor Burns' book on leadership, here's what he said. Leadership is leaders acting, as well as caring, inspiring, and persuading others to act for certain shared goals that represent the values, the wants and the needs, the aspirations and the expectations of themselves and the people that they represent. And the genius of leadership lies in the manner in which leaders care about, visualize, and act on their own and their followers' values and motivations. James McGregor Burns gives us three key points in that paragraph about leaders and about leadership. Number one, leadership omits the use of coercive power. Doesn't need to, if they're good leaders. Number two, leaders have a bias for action. And number three, leaders act with respect for the values of their people. When I read that statement, and I read that paragraph, which basically gives these 3 points, that leadership omits the use of coercive power, leaders have a bias for action, and leaders act with respect for the values of their people, I thought immediately, the first time I ever read it, of Dr. Martin Luther King. Again, here was a leader who understood and did all three well. History has clearly demonstrated that especially effective leaders often tend to emerge during periods of great change. For every major turning point in American history, creative leaders, right for the times and uniquely suited to the task, assume the mantle of leadership. With time, history has judged all of these people to have been great leaders. I'm reminded when Dr. King received the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize, that he said, history has thrust me into this position. Again, it's almost as if there's a higher calling to the great leaders to be at the right time, at the right place, appropriate to lead a nation through a crisis. Let me go on. After completing his college education, Martin Luther King Jr. could have pursued a career that might have been more financially promising than the ministry. He could have stayed in Boston, where living conditions for African Americans were better than those in the South, but he chose to return to Atlanta. I had an opportunity to live in the North because I had 1 or 2 jobs offered, he recalled, but I went back south mainly because I felt that there were great opportunities there to transform the section of the country into something rich. He said, I mean rich in spirit and beautiful. Perhaps Dr. King also went back home because he never got over the racial discrimination that he had experienced, or because he never forgot the injustice of being treated as anything less than a human being. And maybe he went back because of a vow that he made to his mother when still a youngster. You know, he told her, when I get to be a man, I'm going to hit this thing and I'm going to hit it hard. Mother, there is no such thing as one people being better than another. The Lord made all of us equal, and I'm going to see to that. How leaders create positive change. Number one, the first thing that leaders do to create positive change is listen. Lead by being led. To quote Dr. King in 1958, he said, I neither started the protest nor suggested it. I simply responded to the call of the people for a spokesman. Let me give you the context of that statement. During Martin's second year in Montgomery, an incident occurred on a city bus that effectively ignited the American Civil Rights Movement. December 1st, 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old tailor's assistant, was commanded by a bus driver to give up her seat to a white male passenger who had just boarded. Mrs. Parks simply said no. She knew that she was breaking the law, but she nevertheless refused to move. In response, the driver stopped the bus, called the police, and had her arrested. I don't really know why I wouldn't move, she later commented. There was no plot or plan at all. I was just tired. My feet hurt. As I began to study the life of Dr. King, it was interesting in those early days. He didn't run for office. He basically listened to the needs of the people. It was their desires to begin to place him up in a leadership position. It reminds me of the statements of Plato, who said, only those who do not seek power are qualified to hold it. Boy, isn't that a great statement. Wow, it's almost like if you want it, you shouldn't have it. And if you do want it and you get it, you're probably dangerous in the process. The desire for lifelong learning fosters an equally strong tendency to listen. And Dr. King was a great listener. In fact, his mode of operation and leadership was, I listen and then I lead. How many times do we want to lead without listening? You see, as a leader, growth never stops. We never get to a position where we know it all, where we can say it all, where we can teach it all. He had a constant appetite to continue learning. So I put in your notes the 4 L's of a leader. And I believe that they're in this sequence. The first L is loving. You have to love people. The second L is listening. Because if you truly love them, you want to hear what they have to say. The third L is learning. Obviously, when you begin to listen, you begin to learn. And the last one is leading. When you love, listen, and learn, then you're qualified to lead. So how do leaders create positive change? Number 1 is listen. Lead by being led. Number 2, communicate. In other words, connect with others. Now, as you know, I love the subject of communication. And when you think of great speeches, I mean, if you go back into the late 1700s, the great speech is Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. If you go into the middle 1800s, the great speech is the Gettysburg Address. But if you go in the 1900s, the great speech is I Have a Dream. Why? Because he had the ability to communicate vision, as great leaders only have that ability. It's not in your notes. Listen to these thoughts. Interestingly enough, Martin's unique speaking ability was revealed at a very early age. As a child, he started following in his father's footsteps at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Hello. You're sitting in the place right now where he could read the scripture and lead discussions in Sunday school and even preach to the congregation on occasion. And according to Daddy King, Martin held his audiences spellbound when he talked. In studying Dr. King's speeches, there are some keys, I think, to his speaking that I want to pass on to you, because as leaders, we're constantly wanting to communicate vision to our people. Number 1, He spoke in the simple and common language of the people. In other words, he was easy to understand. Or an expression I've used often in my trying to communicate, he put the cookies on the lower shelf. Everybody could have some. He spoke in simple and common language. Number two, he shared stories of sacrifice encouraged by the people. Number three, he used biblical symbols and imagery. For example, he would talk about the David of truth, speaking of the movement, and he would speak of the Goliath of injustice, of the people that were oppressive in that time. Use biblical terms and symbols and imagery. Number four, he told personal stories of people in the movement. The fifth key to Dr. Keen's speeches is that he used metaphors to express hope and courage. Metaphors like after seeing demonstrators assaulted in Birmingham with high-pressure water hoses, he pointed out that the police failed to realize that the protesters had a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. Man, it makes you just want to start marching, doesn't it? Huh? I mean, you can't sit still. He had this incredible ability to speak and communicate, cut right to the people's heart. Number six, he repeated words until they became themes. His first national speech, give us the ballot. He continually said, just give us the ballot, just give us the ballot, give us a chance to vote. Of course, in his great speech, Let Freedom Ring, nearly a dozen times, in that I Have a Dream speech, he kept saying, let freedom ring, let freedom ring, let freedom. He used repetition well. And I stop here just for a moment because a little while ago when we were touring much of this wonderful, not only this facility here, but when we were over in the Keene Center and we were listening to the speeches. I mean, no matter what area you went into to listen to whatever speech he was using, he moved us. And I listen to it and I think, he just moves me. He moves my heart. Well, it's a picture of a leader. It's a picture of a leader who has a passion, but it's a picture of a leader who knows where his or her people are. It's a picture of somebody that can articulate and voice what the people deep down inside actually feel. He put words to their feelings. He put pictures to what they sensed and wanted to see.